Periodically Productions presents Fairy Tales for Unwanted Children. Climbing by Scott Thrower. Once upon a time there was an old man who lived alone in a stone house that clung to the side of a mountain. Each evening he'd leave the house and follow the steep paths he'd worn in the rock, and each night he'd come home, tired of the climbing and the toil, and sit on his porch and stroke his beard, lean his chair back against the house, and look out at the world before him. He enjoyed those moments, those peaceful times, as he wondered about the world. He wondered about the rivers and the oceans, the far-off cities that grew day by day and year by year, and the storms that swept across, rarely reaching high enough on the mountain to bother his quiet, one-room house perched above it all. One day the old man returned to his home, tired from the walk and the climb, to find it ever so slightly changed from when he'd left. Each week he seemed to go farther and work harder, to climb higher and reach further, and yet every week he also had to tighten his belt a bit more, struggled a bit longer at the tougher climbs, and was slower to find the safe handholds when the mountain paths crumbled and fell away into the clouds below. But there was something different this day. Today was different because as he climbed down towards his house on the edge of the mountain, something caught in the light, shining gold in the setting sun on the silvery plate that had borne only crumbs when he'd left. He approached to find the crumbs were gone, along with the sticky red jam that he'd smeared across the dull silver, leaving only a pristine dish with just a glint of yellow. It was a marble, tiny and gold, and it rolled around the dish with a ringing sound. As he peered around his piece of the mountain, the marble almost rolled right off the plate, but he caught it just before it danced away, saving it the long fall to the other side of the clouds. The old man carefully set the plate down and looked in the house, but a cursory look showed that nothing had changed. The same bed of rumpled blankets filled the room. The same shirts hung from the wall. The same fireplace sat cold and empty in the very same corner. He returned to the porch and leaned his chair against the house, still rolling the marble around in the plate. And he looked at the world that had finally come to meet him. By morning, nothing else had changed. The old man stood on the porch, running his fingers through his beard and still feeling the weight of yesterday's climb in his bones, and the tug in his stomach that would draw him back out in search of food. He took one last look at the plate on the porch, which today bore larger crumbs the old man had carefully piled together near the lip, and then he set out on his daily travels. When he returned, he was looking for the plate as soon as he turned the bend, and it shone at him in the light of the setting sun. He forgot his tired legs and the ache of his back and rushed to the porch, which still creaked as it had when he was younger and stronger. Once more the plate was polished clean, and the old man was looking at himself in the same blue-gray eyes for a long moment before he saw it. A small string of yellowing pearls that almost disappeared into the creases of his hand as he poured them from the plate. The old man had never seen a doll small enough to wear them, and he looked out at the world again, more curious than ever about the way it was reaching for him. He spent the evening wondering, thinking about the world below, so strange and distant, even as his stomach rumbled mournfully. He'd been distracted all day thinking about the tiny golden marble and the purloined crumbs. But while he drifted off to sleep hungry, he did it with a smile upon his face, not seeing the near walls of his one-room house. Instead, his mind was full of horizon. The next morning, the old man did not go far. He left the plate in the doorway with the last crumbs he found in the bottom of his sack. He walked loudly from his home before hurriedly creeping back and hiding himself in the blankets of his bed, where he made a small cave out of the blankets with just enough of an opening for a view of the crumbs and the plate, hoping desperately that the grumbling of his belly would not give him away. He watched as the morning sun crept its way across the floor, but he did not grow restless because his mind was alive. He did not grow tired because he felt awake at last after a life of slumber. He did not grow frustrated because he understood it now, why the people below gathered in their cities, why the people above joined together in their clans. When he was young, the unexpected was a terrible thing. It bore away mother and took away dad. It brought taller men with angry hearts and left the man wanting no part of it. So he'd secreted himself away here, where the unexpected could not find him. It had been a very long time since he had experienced the unexpected. And now he thought he had a taste for it. He almost missed the sound at first. The tiny sound of tiny feet as they climbed a tiny stair. The old man held his breath, suddenly a stranger in the one-room house he thought he knew, with its door that stuck, its whistling windows, and its very distinct lack of stairs. He tried not to move because the slightest shift upon the bed might blot out the sounds from beneath, and the old man was rewarded with the smallest creak of a tiny door as it opened. Then there was silence. And in that silence, the old man breathed as shallowly as he dared, waiting for something more, some other sound from beneath the bed on which he hid. He waited, hoping, wishing, dreaming things he hadn't dreamt since he was a babe at his mother's side so very long ago. The world had finally come for the old man, and it was somewhere beneath his bed, and he very much wanted to see it, and yet was terrified to be seen. But the silence was broken by the gurgling of his empty stomach, which was quickly followed by the tiny slamming of a tiny door in the darkness under the bed. The old man burst into motion and leapt to the floor, pressing his stomach against the stone and peering into the darkness by the fading light of day. There was nothing. He pulled the bed aside and there was nothing there to see. He rushed into the corners and found nothing, pulled at the stones and found nothing again, tore at the house and pulled at its bones, and nothing was all that there was. But he kept digging, wrenching until the house was no more and he had nothing left. Nothing but the porch and the meager crumbs on a silver plate and a chair without a house to lean it against. The old man couldn't remember the last time he'd cried, but he did so now, dribbling salty tears into his beard as he looked out at the world in the starlight. Parts of it glowed with the lights of the cities, and others were black, barely touched by the light of the moon. His fingers were torn, and the old man felt more exhausted than he'd ever felt before, more hungry than he'd ever been, both for food and for something he hadn't realized he'd been missing in his long years away from the mountain's top, to be part of the world again. It had taken most of his life, but now he wanted to reach back. So he decided he would. In the morning, he would. This time his climb would go down, away from his trails on the steep side of the mountain, away from the people who loomed at the mountaintop with their cruelty and their clans, down to the people with their doll necklaces and their marble games, their cities that glowed like stars. He would see what the clouds were like from the other side and see what they did upon their oceans and lakes, on their rivers, in their forests. His tears were dry as the tired old man slipped towards sleep, falling into dreams with a smile on his lips and excitement in his heart. One more night alone, he thought, and then I'll join the strangers down below. One more night. And then he closed his eyes and leaned his chair back against the house that was no longer there, halfway up the mountain. Did you find a moral for this week's story? Let us know on Twitter at periodicallypod, or join the Fairy Tales for Unwanted discussion group on Facebook. For more fairy tales for unwanted children, join us at unwantedchildren.ca.